Knockout takes, Almunia saves, knockout follows in, Almunia saves again. You believe in miracles? Yes! Hard hit into right, back at the wall, tie game!
Good evening and welcome to Around the World Sports. My name is Aaron Shellen, and tonight I am happy to be joined by two men who between them have 100 years experience being involved in West Aurora Athletics, Neal Ormond and Rick Albright. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me tonight, and how are you doing?
Well, a pleasure to join you, Aaron, and good to see Rick also doing as well as can be expected under these circumstances. And it's amazing to think that this all happened since our very last broadcast, one of the last in the country of any sporting event back on March 11th.
Yeah, we were talking about that before we went live here, and we broadcast the West Aurora East Aurora a sectionals game, and it was that night that the NBA started pulling players off the court, and it was the very next day that leagues started shutting down. The IHSA, I think, shut all their games down within the next 24 to 48 hours. So yeah, we absolutely had the last full house stadium that I know of. I mean, we had 1,800 people packed into that gym. So
there wasn't a lot of social distancing at that night either.
No, there certainly was not. We were. If there's anything closer than shoulder to shoulder, that's what we were that night for sure.
You mean all this pandemic thing started because I was in Georgia and I missed the East-West game?
That could be it. That absolutely could be it. You were there in spirit. We had your jacket there, though. We had your jacket there. You were there in spirit. Yeah. All right. So yeah. Before we get into it, and I mentioned that the two of you have 100 years experience within the West.
Actually, to correct the record, Aaron, Rick is much younger than I am.
Yeah,
he started broadcasting, and Rick, I did research this. 1971 was when you first started doing football with me, and Danny Butts was the West quarterback. That was 71. So 50 years for Mr. Albright. I started back in 1964. So this was my 56th year that just concluded. So that's 6 between the two of us.
So between the three of us, we have 107 years. But before I get into the past, I want to talk a little bit about just this past season of West Aurora basketball. It was something that I was able to be a part of through WBIG, and it was an unbelievable experience for me. From that first game at Naperville Central all the way to that final game of the year against East, I met some great people. And I frankly, I saw a lot of really good basketball, and I saw a lot of passion out of a lot of kids. And so just sort of a quick recap of the season. The boys finished 11-20, but they won the regional championship. And anytime you can put a trophy in the case, it was a successful season. Going on
a number 3 seed and a number 11 seed.
Yeah, going on that Cinderella run, they beat a 27-win Waubonsee team, and then they beat Plainfield Central before losing to East in that sectional semifinals. The girls had an unbelievable regular season, winning 20 games, and they made it to the regional championship game. So all in all, it was a very, very successful season for the West Aurora basketball program, both boys and girls. So what stood out to you guys? What moment, what game, what stood out to you about the 2019-2020 West Aurora basketball season?
Rick, you want to go first?
You're muted, Rick.
I would say definitely that the never give up spirit of the team. And I think they saved their best games for the best teams. And they were going to a game where they were the underdog, and it would be a 2-point game throughout. And they'd win a couple of those and lose a couple of those. I don't think most West Aurora fans would consider the season a success. We are a spoiled motley crew. If we don't have 20 wins, it's usually not considered a success. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is with West Aurora fans. And the regional championship salvaged some of that, but you'd have a hard time convincing a lot of West Side fans it was a successful season. Okay.
Yeah, I think you're right, Rick. Fans have come to be used to 20 plus wins in a year. The last 3 years, winning the conference title, winning 20 games or more. I think they were 28-6 last year. But coming into the season, I think most West followers knew it was going to be a rebuilding year, if you will, a tough year, because we really didn't have a lot of senior experience coming back other than Kelvin Balfour. And 4 players who had played at West as freshmen and some as sophomores were not on the team, but did star for East Aurora and Oswego. And you take those 4 players away and only have Kelvin Balfour, it really was a year that I think was rewarding in the sense that despite the adversity, and there was injuries also that occurred during the year, key players. Kelvin Balfour had broken his foot during the summer. Logan Mont was injured and lost about 7 games during the year. Kenny Dyson was injured during the year. So put all that together, and I think, frankly, that the players and the coaching staff did a very good job culminating in those 2 upset wins in the regional. And that, for me, was the captured the season's improvement and intensity, winning those 2 games when they were definitely underdogs and going into the sectional semifinal. So I think I'm not disappointed about the season. I hope West fans are not, given all of the adversity and lack of experience that they had. We know we've got a great sophomore class coming up, but it really is the type of a season that tests your coaching staff. And Rick would know this, being a coach. Those are some of the most satisfying seasons when you take kids that are not superstars and turn them into a team that is able to win some close ball games.
Yeah, Rick, what did you see? And I'll get to kind of my memory or my biggest kind of takeaway from the season. But Rick, what did you see? And that brings up a great point. What did you see from Coach Johnson and his coaching staff? Because I mean, at the end of the year, at the end of the calendar year, this was a team that was really struggling to find their identity. What did you see from the coaching staff and from the team that allowed them to really play their best basketball at the end of the season?
I think Coach Johnson's emphasis on defense and the improvement on defense that we saw throughout the year, I think he convinced Kelvin Balfour that his game was to distribute the ball and to involve his teammates. And, just the confidence the team had as they moved along. And we said this several times, it would have been very easy for this team just to lay down. And they never did that. They never did it.
Yeah. And they did win some big games and almost won games. That loss to Oswego East right before the end of the regular season was typical of how taking a much highly favored team right down to the wire.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rick, you said it earlier that they really played up to the level of their tough competition the longer the season went on. I mean, they played East Aurora really tough earlier in the season. They played, I believe it was Joliet West, one of the top 10 teams in the country. They were actually beating them at halftime. They were leading Bolingbrook after 3 quarters. So they played up to the level of their competition really throughout the season. And Rick, you made a great point about Kelvin. And I think the one thing I noticed from him from the beginning of the season to the end of the season is that tournament at the beginning of the year. He led the team in scoring. He averaged 20 points a game, whatever it was. The end of the season, he was still averaging 20 points a game, but the team was so much more efficient offensively because he wasn't forcing his shots. He was running the offense that Coach Johnson wanted to run, and it helped that other people stepped up. I mean, Kenny Dyson the second half of the year, once they moved him into the starting lineup, played fantastic. Axel Matola, when he had his head in the game, Axel was a force both offensively and defensively. Chris Nieves, when his shot was falling, they absolutely had the players on the team that allowed him to be successful. And you could just see, I made this comment a couple of times to you guys throughout the course of the season. You could see the actual improvement in these players game over game over game. I mean, it was a different team in February than it was in November, and that's absolutely a testament to Coach Johnson and the rest of that coaching staff. Absolutely. The arrow was absolutely pointing up for the boys as the season went on, and Neal, you had a front row seat for many of the girls' games. They finished their season 20-9. What stood out to you about the girls team this year?
I think, again, it was a team that overcame adversity. They had some good players. Some of the underclassmen were some of their better players, but it was a matter of Coach Teresa Waldinger convincing the ladies that it had to be a team effort. And so she got them to work better and better. They won a lot of close ball games, so they were mature in that respect, starting right from the get-go when they won the Wabansie Valley Warhawk tournament with a couple of upset wins in that one, and proceeded to run the conference title back to Aurora. In fact, it was the only conference title that West Aurora won this past school year in the fall and winter seasons. So those girls really played very well as a team. They were a very hardworking team. Riley Mont was one of the leading scorers in the area. She's only a sophomore, so she got 2 more years to go, and she's a definite, I think, Division I player someplace if she chooses to go that route. She's also a very good softball player, and she could choose to go softball. And I'm fortunate to be able to coach her in both sports. But a lot of other seniors, unsung seniors in some cases. Taylor Wyatt was a perfect example of a young lady that was not a star, but she was the ultimate team player, hard worker, set a great role model. And even though she didn't start that many games, she was as important to the team as any of the other players out there. The twins really improved, I thought, the Lambert twins, Izzy and Ree. They both were starters, and I think Izzy may be going on to play in college, and I know Ree is going to Augustana, where she may have an opportunity to play also. Those were 2 senior keys for us. Olivia Vanderwood, a big 5'9" center. I say big because it's all relative. She was our biggest, and she was our leading rebounder, but she went up against some even taller girls during most of the season. So it was a great, satisfying season, and congratulations to them for winning that conference title.
Yeah, that Mont family has quite a bit of athletic talent. Logan, of course, playing college football, not basketball. He's in Iowa, correct? Not at Central. Iowa, but he's playing in Iowa.
He's going to be playing at Central College in Pella, Iowa, which is his mother's alma mater.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
And he chose to go football and set all kinds of school records as a receiver, even though he was a quarterback for 3 years coming into the last season.
Rick, what about you?
I saw 5 of the girls' games that I saw just as a fan, and I was impressed with the coaching. And also, was the big girl, your post player, what's her name? Liz? Olivia. Yeah, I watched her as a sophomore, and she stood outside and shot the 3.
Yes, she likes
it. But on this team, she needed to be where she was, inside rebounding and being a post player. So that was a sacrifice for her too. And your job as a coach is to get the kids to understand why those things are necessary.
Yes.
Absolutely. All right, so I want to go back in time here a little bit. So, Neal, you've got 56 years. Rick, you've got 50. Aaron has 1. So I'm going to sit this one out. So take me back and let's talk about let's start with, because I've heard stories from both of you about what I think your favorite teams are, but I just want to hear, going back, looking at the last 5 decades, what team stands out to you in the West Aurora program? Boys, girls, doesn't matter. What team stands out to you and why? Rick, we'll start with you.
Okay, I've got to say the 2000 team, because a number of things. It was my last year of coaching. We were state champions.
Which team is this?
2000.
The boys basketball?
Boys basketball.
Boys basketball, okay.
Yeah, because they didn't have a star player. They had 5 players who averaged between 13 and 15 points. They weren't expected to do that well, because they didn't have the big name player that some of the other teams had. And we'll talk about the 76 team in a little bit, but they had 4 Division I players on the starting team. But this team, even though a couple of them did play Division I basketball, there were no consensus all-staters. So I think the 2000 was my favorite team, and a lot of that was because it was my swan song and the coaching staff too. So I probably enjoyed that one as much.
Neal, what about you?
Neal?
That would be right near the top of my list also, Rick. The 2000, the epitome of what a team should be. But during my years, and I have to exclude when I was a player, most memorable team was the 1958, and then they went on in 59 to go downstate, make the Final Four, both of them in 58 and 59. But since I've been broadcasting in 64, I'd have to give the nod to a couple teams. I think the 1973 team, which finished 3rd in the state, had many of the same things that Rick, you just talked about for the 2000 team.
Including Neal, including a 6'5" point guard.
Jay Bryant. Yeah.
Yes. John Bryant.
Or John Bryant, rather. Yeah. John went on to play at Marquette, and that was a very good team. Matthew Hicks was on that team. And speaking of the Hicks family, Ronnie Hicks, who just unfortunately passed away this past week, was a star on the 1976 team. He led the team in both rebounding and scoring in 76. They went on to finish second in the state on a second shot at the buzzer by Laird Smith of Morgan Park to upset the West Hopes for winning their first state championship. But that 76 team, again, some very unsung players. Jay Bryant played on that one along with people like Joe Michaels, Ronnie Hicks, as we said. Larry Hatchett was another key player on that team. So I give a nod to both 73 and 76. And then in recent years, the 1984 team that was led by Kenny Battle was a favorite team to watch. They were certainly exciting with Kenny and Randy Norman and others on that great team. And then 97 that finished in the second place in the state, and certainly 2000 has to top the list. The 2000 team, and you were on the coach's bench for all of that, really brought back so many memories when I see some of those players today. Mike Fowler, who's now the head coach at Plainfield East, was the point guard. I remember him hitting one from near midcourt to finish off the third quarter. So many great memories of all of those teams.
Neal, we mentioned the Hicks, both from 73 and 76. And both those kids, when they were 8th graders, freshmen, were B team players, Ronnie and Matt, and improved much.
The coaches should have had them higher, I think. Who was the coach back then, Ron?
Yeah, and of course, they both went on to play in college, and both of them went to play overseas professionally. And we mentioned the Hicks family and the Bryant's family. There have been a number of great families, and I mentioned those two on Facebook, and then I had to come back a day later and correct it, because you had the Heiss family, with a number of great basketball players. You had the Fowlers, Herman Fowler, who was a great basketball player. And then you just mentioned Mike, his grandson. No, his son. And his grandson played too. There's been a bunch of great families, and they've all contributed to the basketball program, and they're to be applauded.
The Bryant family is right near the top of the list of that. When you talk about families, Rick, remember when they moved to town, and Fred Bryant was a senior, John Bryant was a sophomore, and you knew right then that the little Bryants, that are little brothers, were going to be ball players too. And sure enough, they were all the way through Mark, who was the baby of the family.
Yeah, and again, in tribute to Ronnie Hicks, he wasn't the biggest player on that team. We had a 6'8" center, Bruce Johnson, who went on to play at Villanova, correct?
He did.
And one of my highlights was the Villanova coach came to take Bruce out for dinner, and Bruce could pick 2 coaches to go with him. Actually, he picked 3. And he picked McDougal and two of his grade school coaches, myself and Jim Foster. And that was a great evening sitting there with Raleigh and the coach from Villanova, Massimilo, and listen to all his stories, about games that he had played in. It was just a great, great evening.
I was at his house, Johnson's house, when Raleigh Massimino came the night that he signed with Villanova. And just hearing the stories from that legendary coach was quite a treat. But you talk about coaches. Aaron, you didn't get a chance to see the earlier coaches in the dynasty for West. And West was named one of the top 10 dynasties by the Tribune, I think it was, this past week, for the basketball in the last 20 years. But you can go back to the early days when Dick Dorsey in 1958-59 took West downstate, and then John McDougal came in, and he was there for 11 years, took West to the state semifinals in 73, and then the state championship in 76. And then Gordy Kirkman, the legendary Coach Kirkman, 39 years as a head coach, one of the winningest coaches in state history. And boy, what a run he had. All of those coaches were just great people to work with from a broadcasting standpoint, as is Brian Johnson, the West coach now. So
Neal, I'm going to tell you a story. Neal, I'm going to tell you a coaching story now you haven't heard.
Okay.
This is good.
Maybe you have. My dentist is Joe Michaels, who just mentioned a second ago on that 76 team. And Joe was a defensive specialist, a great all-around player, athlete. In his weight room at one time.
No, we're good.
Okay. In his waiting room at one time, he had Coach McDougal and Bill Warden, the Morgan Park coach, waiting for the dental work from Joe. And he said every time he looked out into his waiting room, here were these 2 legendary coaches who had gone head-to-head and lost in a last-second shot for West Aurora by Laird Smith of Morgan Park. And here they were just swapping stories back and forth, waiting to see Joe.
When Rick was coaching, Joe was my color man on the broadcast, Aaron. For many years, Michael's help.
One of the things
he said.
Oh, go ahead, Rick. Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Joe said that he and Bill Warden, whom he had this dislike for because cost him a state championship, became really good friends and went out to lunch. And I believe Joe was at his wedding. He married late in life, and he was amazed how great a guy he was.
Wow, that's good. That's good. Real gentleman.
One of the things that stood out for me, I think we actually lost Rick's video. We've got a still shot there of him, so that's okay. But one of the things that stood out for me this year was how accommodating Coach Johnson, not just Coach Johnson, but the entire coaching staff. I've never been in a situation where a head coach, having just lost a big game or, just any game, I mean, he would come up to me and say, "Hey, do you want to talk?" You know, most players, most coaches, when they lose, they're out the door. You know, but there were times, I think it was in that game against East. I think it was in that final game against East. They had just lost the regional semifinal game against East Aurora, and Coach Johnson sectionals came up to me and said, "Hey, do you want to talk?" And I was floored, because you just don't see that. Most, like I said, teams lose, especially in an important game like that. They just want to get back to the locker room. They want to, he wants to console his kids. He wants to do whatever, but he made himself available to us before and after every single game. And
I know our listeners really appreciated that. I've had a number of people tell me the same thing, that win or lose, Coach Johnson always willing to talk. And that was, I think, representative of the man, what a gentleman he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the moment for me, and we got, this is what I was hoping would happen, but the moment for me that really stood out of this past season, and I want to kind of get into, both of your histories here in just a second, but for me, the individual moment that stood out from this past season was Neal Ormond recognition night, and not just because you were honored and you were inducted into the IHSA. You were given the IHSA Distinguished Media Award. But that whole night, I mean, that game ended with a half-court buzzer beater from Kelvin Balfour. I mean, that whole night was just perfect start to finish. And to me, that was the single best night of the season for me, I think.
And all of that action happened right in front of us. Mm-hmm. The two of you exploded in your seats when it happened. And Coach Johnson and I were a little bit more under control. But that, which I knew this team had it in them, a final stretch run that was going to be impressive. That'll be a lifetime memory.
Well, it was for me too, Neal, just to see you honored. And tonight was very special because I found out I had 50 years of experience and not 46. Shoot, another milestone.
There you go. Congratulations on 50 years.
I just gained 4 years in the last half hour.
So we talked a little bit about the teams that stand out for you guys. I want to transition to individual players. Is there a player in the last 50 years that to you sort of really, if you could have a Mount Rushmore of West Aurora athletes, who would be on that? Who are the athletes that really to you signify West Aurora Athletics?
I think we'd agree on number one. I think it would be Kenny Battle. Let's see what Neal thinks.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Also on that list, now is where it gets dicey. You would have to put John Bryant, I believe. I would have to put his name escapes me now, and he's just there a couple of years ago. I would put Cameron on there. What was his last name, Neal?
Cameron Denotland.
Denotland. Yeah. Okay, I'd put Denotland on there too. Boy, how do you narrow down? You got the Bryants and the Hicks. Matt Hicks, I think he still owns the dunk record at Northern.
19.
He's got to be on there.
73. Also, Rick, and I think you would agree with me that Billy Taylor from the class of 91, one of the top 4 scorers all time for West, deserves to be on the list because he went on to a great career, coached at Notre Dame, now is still coaching as a head coach and assistant coach in the major Division I programs. But Billy Taylor was a 4-year starter for West. And then
a 3-year starter at Notre Dame, I believe.
Yeah, right. Digger Phelps player. Yeah, right. We had some great scorers over the years, Aaron. John Trell Walker, I think, is probably the leading scorer, class of 2014. But we also had Juwan Starks, class of 2012. Mentioned Ken. Kenny's only the number 5 highest scorer for West, but boy, was he exciting. And he really blossomed because as a freshman, he did not play. But as a sophomore, he scored only 140 points, but he came to play in 1984 when we went downstate. And then of course, playing in college and also playing in the pro ranks, the NBA. So the list goes on and on of players who not necessarily the high scorers, but were great rebounders, great team players. I could list 25 players who would be among the best for West.
Yeah, I'm sure I could call out a season and say which player stood out on this team, and the two of you would be able to pick a name. I mean, that's the great thing about high school and college sports is that it's constantly cyclical. I mean, it's 4 years and you move on, or it's 3 years, or if you're in college, it's 1 year and you move on. But that's the great thing about non-professional sports is that there are so many different people that go through the different programs that, I'm sure there are hundreds of different players that the two of you could tell me stories about.
Yes.
Yeah, I would think that maybe David Heiss would be up in there too, Neal. He was, he also had a good collegiate career and a small professional career.
Yes. Yeah, he went to Bemidji State, didn't he?
Bemidji State it's in Minnesota, correct?
Yeah. Along with David Lee, another West great guard who went up there.
Yeah, and David Heiss played with the Utah Jazz for
Yes,
several
right.
games.
I didn't
Right.
realize that there were so many pro players from West. I mean, you have to assume that because the program's been so successful that they were going to have their fair share of D1 and and players that went to major colleges and stuff. But I didn't realize there were so many players that had actually made it to the NBA. It's such a small fraction of the number of people that play college and high school sports. But that's
And
impressive.
one of the other ones, and I was fortunate enough to be a teammate of his, Bill Small, class of 59, who was our leading scorer, first team All-State as a junior, and when we finished 4th, and then in 59, he led us to 2nd place. And he went on and played, back then the pros were not the way it is now.
Right.
For the Goodyear team, went up to Detroit, and he had 2 sons, he and Kay Flanders, who was a West grad, had a son, Mike Small, who has become one of the leading golf coaches in college now, the University of Illinois as the head coach in golf, and has been the PGA winner, I think, for a record number of years. Rick would know as a golfer. And in fact, he just came off the golf links, I think, with the broadcast. But yeah, you know Mike Small.
I do, Neal. And Bill Small, incredible story against Joliet. He had 53 or 54 points, 53. And Joliet had 51. And that was before the 3-point shot.
All right, so next, kind of the next topic, and I think I've mentioned this once or twice, but we've talked about teams, we've talked about players. What moment stands out for you? What game, what moment within a game is kind of that one that if somebody says, "Hey Rick, hey Neal, tell me a story about West Aurora Athletics," what story are you going to?
And I would quickly respond. That moment in 1976, state finals. West had never won a state championship, but they were winning in the 4th quarter as the seconds rolled down. And I thought to myself, we're going to do it. And then we lost the ball out of bounds, having a lead. And Morgan Park inbounded the ball, and Laird Smith hit what was probably about a 20-foot shot from outside as the horn sounded to win the game by 1 point over West Aurora. it just sucked the air out of me when I was broadcasting. It was as if somebody had kicked me in the stomach. That's a moment I will never forget.
It's funny that you say that, because normally when people talk about individual moments, they talk about the victorious ones, talk about the championships, they talk about the banners, they talk about the trophies, they talk about records. This guy scored 53 points in a game or had 30 rebounds or whatever it is. And you go to a last, and I mean, it's makes sense just because of the stakes of the game, but it's not very often that moment for you or for anybody is a loss. That doesn't happen very often. So, Rick, what about you?
There's another moment that stood out for me, and Neal had to help me with the years because I'm hauling years. But East-West game came down to the last second, a tip-in for the West win. It's at Aurora. The officials go to the bench to see if the shot was good, and the East Aurora scorekeeper said yes.
Yeah, well, that
tip-in has been debated.
It was 1973, Rick, and Craig Hardy tipped in a shot at the buzzer on a miss by John Bryant from the corner in 1973. I think East coach Ernie Cavisto to this day believes it came after the horn. But not only did they have a horn in those days, Aaron, but they had a pistol that they would shoot with blanks. And the gun was being kept by an East Aurora man, Art Court. And because of the argument that ensued afterward about did he shoot it soon enough, he never did another ball game for East after that criticism. But we had a morning talk show back in those days on the radio. And the morning after, Coach Cavisto came on and he said he couldn't believe that they counted the shot. He said, well, even Ormond said that it came after the gun. Well, I didn't think it came after the gun. I said, there's a shot at the horn. It's tipped in good. And he used my delay in a call. One of the most embarrassing moments as a broadcaster was implying that the tip-in came after the horn. It didn't, in my opinion. It came just as the horn was sounding.
So many moments between East and West. How many times have the two teams? It's over 200, right? Or no, it's over 100. It's like 100. How many times have they played each other?
Well, they started back in 1913, one of the oldest rivalries in the country, and the series stands at 139 wins for West, 90 for East Aurora. They played 229 games. So, there have been so many great memories and many years. Despite the records coming in, it would be a close ball game, but either team could win. So, so many memories over the years.
And so many years, one team would knock the other one out of the state tournament.
Because they always played in the regional. The IHS signed them to the same regional. And West was generally the host of the regional and East the host of the sectional. And that's another one that Ernie Cavisto felt was inappropriate because he never got to play West on his home floor because West would always knock him out during the regional, or almost always.
I'll tell you, I've done most of my broadcasting career has been spent doing high school, lower level college, and lower level professional sports, and I've never seen anything like the two East-West games I was able to be a part of this year. And I know that attendance at West games was down this past season because the record wasn't what most West fans.
And also, they were in a new conference that played games on Thursday nights.
Right. You talked about that a number of times during the season, that because they were in a new conference, all of a sudden games were on different nights. They were at different times, and people have to change their schedules. So, I know that attendance isn't what it normally was, but even that regular season game at home, it was intense. And that playoff game was.
Aaron, you saw what happened when they put the sectional down at a school that only seated about 1,800 people at Lockport.
Yeah, they sold out within a couple hours, right? They had to turn people
Yes.
away within a couple
yeah.
hours of the tickets going on sale.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked about that at the beginning, I mean, we were literally shoulder to shoulder. I mean, we had our table with our two seats, and then we had people sitting on either side of us that were watching the game. And I have to think that if you put that game in a 4,000 seat stadium, it's still going to sell out. I mean, it was packed. It was a packed house for sure.
A lot of people disappointed, and I think a lot of West fans too, included, that they didn't at East Aurora, one of the best venues in the state, one of the largest seating capacities, and they moved it or they assigned it to a school that didn't have anywhere near that, maybe half the seating that could have been at East Aurora had they played it there.
Yeah, and I did, that actually gives me an opportunity to give a shout out to Justin who runs the West Aurora the basketball Twitter feed. He was there with us that night, and he ran a live stream through his through a streaming service to allow people to watch the game and listen to you and I call the game. And you do what you got to do to get people, so that people can watch it. And unfortunately, it didn't end the way we wanted it to. But yeah, that was it really was quite an adventure. And I said this to you guys during the season that I truly felt like I had been sort of, accepted as an honorary, West Aurora, booster or fan or, alum or whatever you want to call it. It was a great experience. It really, really was. I mean, we had some bumps in the road. There were some broadcasting hiccups, especially when we, we're trying to broadcast that first East-West game, and we ran into some technical issues on the back end, and people were not happy with us because they couldn't hear the game on the radio. But man, it was absolutely a great experience for me. I had such a good time being a part of those games, and coming in.
As a broadcast colleague, I want to thank you, Aaron. You really added a lot, and I know the West fans certainly enjoyed having you included in our coverage. And Rick, of course, is the old standby, 50 years. They really enjoy having Rick there with the statistics and commentary. So I want to say, as the play-by-play guy, how much I appreciate the help and the input that both of you have given.
Well, thank you, Neal. Let me tell you one more story about the East-West game.
Please.
Okay. Now, you know that I was down in Georgia visiting a sick sister down there, and I was ready to listen to you guys. My niece built not quite $1 million, but a little cabin in the woods, which is almost $1 million cabin, and she's got all the latest technology in there. And I had heard her earlier say, "Alexa, turn on the radio." So I had the basement of this $1 million home for myself. And I went over and I said, "Alexa, turn on WBIG radio, Aurora." Nothing. And then I saw a power switch and I repeated, "Alexa." I was talking to the remote vacuum cleaner.
Oh.
And the remote vacuum cleaner took off, and it was all I could do to get the remote vacuum cleaner back into its port. But I did listen to the game, and I did watch some of it too with Justin's. Yes, that was great.
Yeah, like I said, it didn't end the way we wanted it to end, but yeah, it was a fun season. I mentioned this at the beginning. You saw growth from a lot of players. Players that are moving on. That team, a lot of it wasn't an experienced team, but there were a lot of seniors. So a lot of those players are moving on to do other things. But you saw the growth. At the beginning of the season, we used to joke that no shot for Axel was a bad shot. As soon as he was crossing half court, he was looking for his shot, and the coaching staff was able to get him to focus more on getting into the paint and driving into the paint. And, Rick, you mentioned getting Kelvin to be more of a facilitator rather than a scorer. Kenny Dyson, we mentioned him. Once he moved into the starting lineup, he played he played really, really well. We talked about the sophomores. Isaiah Seiler and Kenny Weekly came up, and Isaiah especially had a couple of games where he was huge with his shooting. So yeah, the future I think is definitely bright. I look forward to being a part of it. So I have one more question for the two of you. I know, Rick, you have a tea time tomorrow, so I want you to be able to get to bed here at some point reasonably soon. But so you both have been honored over the years. Rick, you're in the West Aurora Blackhawks Sports Boosters Hall of Fame. Neal, I mentioned earlier you were presented with the IHSA Distinguished Media Award this past January. Did either of you, when you first started, did you think this is where you were going to end up 50 years later? I mean, when you started coaching or you started broadcasting, what was your end goal? What did you want?
Rick holds the record, incidentally, for the most years coached.
It looks like we just lost Rick, so hopefully
he's back.
Oh, there he is. We got his audio, but no video.
Okay.
That's okay. Rick, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, there we are.
I would read you a plaque that's on my wall here, and it's from a former football player of mine, Randy Melvin. And Randy was invited to my retirement dinner, probably by Neal, but he wrote me the best letters I've ever received, and it was on the letterhead of the New England Patriots. Randy was a defensive line coach, is where he played for me too, in 8th grade. But Randy, he said, I'm old enough so I can call you Rick. He said, but I prefer to be coach. And his last paragraph said he mentioned the stops he'd made in his coaching career up until the New England Patriots, Super Bowl champions. And he said, the one thing that I always took from you, Coach, was to make it fun. He said, I don't know if I ever had more fun than I had in my 8th grade football year. And he said, in every place I've stopped along the line, I've tried to remember that. And comments like that, and particularly that one, is kind of a highlight. That's just saying, okay, here's your raison d'être, your reason for being enough.
That's great. No, that's a great story. We I think sometimes we forget that sports are supposed to be fun. They're games. They're you get to play a game for, if you're a professional, you're getting paid to play a game. And I think sometimes we forget that. And there are coaches who take the fun out of it because they're more interested in the win-loss record than they are development and allowing the kids to enjoy themselves. And, if you have somebody who was able to take that with them throughout the years, I think that's a testament to you and the job that you did.
And the other thing would be the friendship with Neal. For 50 years, I don't think we've ever had a crossword with each other. And I've made some dumb mistakes, and, we've been with some experiences, times when you bring the reel tape recorder to the game,
yes,
but you don't have a take-up reel. It's things like that, and we go back that far. And to the immortal Bob Block, who got us both started in this business, just a big thanks there. Neal, it's all yours.
I agree with you, Rick. The fun is so important. I still remember my first game of doing high school after getting started in sportscasting in college and in graduate school. And then deciding, even though I had an opportunity to go with NBC and replace a legend named Keith Jackson up in Washington, I decided I want to come back to Aurora and do high school sports on WBIG for a gentleman named Bob Locke. And my first game, I still remember vividly, was at St. Charles in the football stadium where they had never had a radio broadcast. So I took a long telephone wire, hooked it up in the school, strung it through the trees to the top row of the bleachers at St. Charles. And wouldn't you know, it rained that night. So here we are trying to broadcast a game. That was my baptism in 1964. But throughout all the years, it's been I had no idea that it would lead to this many years behind the microphone. I just knew that I was blessed to have the opportunity to bring to people the games of high school players, the purest form of athleticism, I think. And every year you get a new team. You've got dedicated coaches and players. So many things that are rewarding. The friendships with all of the coaches that I've gotten to know over the years has been fantastic. Even officials now come up and will remind me that they listen to the games when they're not there, and they're glad that I don't get all over the referees. I said, "Oh, that's Rick Albright."
That's Rick's job, right? I remember hearing those stories. That's Rick's job.
But so many things that have been blessings for me, and I never had any idea when I got started that it would be now 56 years and counting in this profession. So I couldn't be luckier to be in this situation.
Well, again, I want to thank both of you. And I said this at the end of the season. Me coming in as the new guy. You really. And I remember the first couple of games. I really tried to, I guess, control myself because I didn't want to step on toes. The two of you had been doing this for so long that I didn't want to be that guy to come in and start to blabber all over Rick and not let Rick get his stuff in. And it was a challenge for me initially coming into that situation because the two of you have worked for so long together that you have that innate relationship. And Rick knows when it's time, it's time for him to start talking, and Neal knows when Rick is going to say, and I didn't want to get in the way of that. I just wanted to be there to add my insight. And it occurred to me really quickly that guys were okay with me stepping in and saying what I had to say, and I wasn't stepping on toes, and that you appreciated what I was bringing to the broadcast, and that made it easy for me. It made it very comfortable for me. It made it a very simple transition. Coming into turning a 2-man booth into a 3-man booth is never an easy thing, but the two of you made it very, very, very easy for me. Very seamless, and I've said it 100 times, but I had an absolute blast, and I can't wait to do it again.
Well, you met the challenge and you rose to it. So we enjoyed having you.
Thank you, Rick.
We certainly did, and we look forward to the future also. I think because you are a professional and have that good sense about it in a profession that is really very rare. There aren't very many high school broadcasters now, and there's a unique thing about it. West Aurora is a unique place also. Great people, great students, great players, and a community that really appreciates the dedication and professionalism that I think our broadcasts try to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. So, guys, I wanted to thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me tonight. It's been nice to catch up. I haven't seen either of you since the end of the season, so it's been very nice to catch up. Some of the stories I've heard before, some of them I haven't, and that was exactly what I was hoping, because for me this is just an opportunity to learn more about the program and learn more about what I was involved in this past season. So once again, tonight I had the pleasure of being joined by West Aurora legends Neal Ormond and Rick Albright. Hopefully, guys, the three of us will be back together again for the 2020-2021 West Aurora Hoops season. Again, thank you for your time. Guys, my name is Aaron Shellen, and this has been Around the World Sports. You can reach me on Facebook at Around the World Sports, on Twitter at SportsGuyAaron, or you can email me at aaronimslombard@gmail.com. Have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.